Hey, Larken Rose here. Wanted to make a video about law and order conservatives. Now, both the left and the right sort of do the thing of, well, it's the law, you have to obey it. But I would say conservatives do that way more often. I sometimes, like in my feed, little shorts will come up from Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh or whatever. And they get a bunch of things right. Basically, they get a bunch of things right whenever they're advocating actual freedom. But it's interesting to watch conservatives do the weird floundering cop-out that they do. And I say this as a former conservative myself. That's the part of the status spectrum I came from. And I know I did the exact same thing. And now it's sort of embarrassing to watch and go, ooh, I did that. What the hell? Where they're going along and they're talking about principles and like the people have the right to say what they want and they have the right to, freedom of association, freedom of disassociation, and they have the right to be armed and blah, 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 blah. And when it comes to something that they want immoral, violent, authoritarian aggression used for, like the war on drugs, instead of talking in principles, because they can't, instead of explaining why it's okay to initiate violence against somebody for having the wrong plant or something, they jump right to, well, it's illegal. You're a criminal. You should be arrested. It's against the law. You should be arrested. It's against the law. It's crime. It's crime. You should be arrested. It's against the law. And when the law conflicts with what they believe in, like when you're talking about gun control, suddenly they're talking about principles again. So it's this weird thing, and again, both sides do it, but I think it's the conservatives do it more glaringly, obviously, where they talk in terms of principles and morality and individual rights when it comes to the things they actually want, but when it comes to the authoritarian garbage that they advocate, and this was true when I was one, then they jump over to, well, it's the law, like defer to, well, magic scribbles on paper. Like, I don't have to explain why that's justified or legitimate. It's the law. You're a criminal. You should be prosecuted and thrown in prison because you disobeyed the law. It is the law. You can't disobey the law. Because first of all, they have this weird worship of authoritarian decrees while imagining that they're pro-freedom. But it's a part-time worship of these decrees, because if something comes along that's authoritarian garbage that they happen to oppose, then they weirdly harp on principles, like the right to be armed, the people have the right to resist an unjust government, and blah, 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 and, which is totally true. And therefore, a law trying to disarm the people is totally illegitimate, which is totally true. They can speak in terms of principles and morality and first principles and first philosophical concepts when it comes to the freedom they advocate. But when it comes to the authoritarian domination they advocate, they just completely fly off the reservation and go over to just saying, well, it's the law, as if that means anything. And what's really weird is that they recognize the insanity and stupidity of that if the left does that. If the left says, well, now it's illegal to have a gun, and it's the law, you're bad if you disobey, they won't just accept that. They'll use the exact same argument for the status crap they want, but they won't accept the exact same argument from somebody else when it's about status crap that they don't want. And it's weird to watch people like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh, who try to be logical and try to be rational, and not that they always succeed, but they speak in terms of principles and stuff when it's convenient. And then all that flies out the window and they fall back on the law and order thing as if submission to authority equals civilization. Even while they celebrate like the American Revolution, which was literally a bunch of criminal, treasonous, terrorist cop killers. That's literally what they were. That is what those terms mean. People who disobeyed the law and planned out and plotted and conspired and used violence against the law enforcers to overthrow them and defeat their attempts at control. That's what they were. That's what the founding fathers were, at least the ones who fought in the revolution. Then there were a bunch of opportunistic politicians after that who did the Constitution. But to glorify that and to still do the whole law and order routine is so weird. Like, you're cheering for literally the way these terms are defined in the statist paradigm, and they're still in the statist paradigm. You're celebrating people who committed treason and were traitors and terrorists and criminals and cop killers. They were all of those things. And they were doing that against a government that was way, 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 way more permissive than the U.S. government or any of the state governments are now. The power King George had, the number of things he restricted and taxed, was absolutely trivial compared to what all the state governments and the federal government do on a daily basis. So in the mind of conservatives, who, worship at the feet of the thugs of the state, those brave men and women in blue, rah, 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 for the American Revolution, where they shot at the law enforcers over things like a, 3 or 4% tax on tea and pieces of paper, the Stamp Act. These dumb little trivial taxes. There was no income tax. There was no employment tax. There was like this trivial amount of authoritarian control. And they rah, rah, rah about the people then shooting at their own government and shooting at the law enforcers. And conservatives go, rah, rah, rah. What about today's enforcers who are doing way worse stuff on a daily basis all over the place? Is it okay to resist them? No, you cop-killing terrorist. You hypocritical idiot. And they don't even bother to try to give an actual argument for it, because there isn't one. There is no argument they could make that isn't just glaringly hypocritical. Well, yeah, violent criminal rebellion is perfectly justified against an excise tax on tea, but now that they're stealing a giant chunk of everybody's income, don't you dare resist law enforcement. You just petition and vote and do all the things that the Declaration of Independence said, well, we tried this and we tried this and we tried this and we tried this. Didn't work. They added insult to injury. They stomped on us all over the place. So now we're telling them, screw you, you're not in charge of us and we're going to resist. Conservatives, yay, rah, 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 they were awesome, they were brave. What if we resist them now? No, you evil terrorist criminal. It's so stupid. And again, I was one of them, and I was so stupid, and I couldn't see at the time that my brain would literally just shut off when it came to the statist garbage that I supported, which wasn't a very long list. It was like, well, the military and the police, because I used to imagine police like protected people instead of just being the biggest street gang around, and courts, and that was basically it. I was sort of constitutionalist conservative. But if somebody would say, what if I disobey their command? Oh, I also, it's embarrassing. At one point, I was young and clueless and idiotic. I supported the war on drugs, like a complete idiot, because I thought, well, drugs are bad and they ruin people's lives, so they should be illegal. Like, that was the extent of my thought process, which can't even be called a thought process. It was just knee-jerk stupidity, which a lot of conservatives still do now. But I remember being there, and I can still picture my brain just doing the flying leap away from principles when it came to the statist garbage I wanted, because there was no way in hell for me to justify everybody should be robbed to pay for the giant military monstrosity that I want to protect everybody. But don't you dare advocate that I be robbed to pay for the giant welfare state that you want to protect everybody. Because for some reason, when you do it, it's bad, and when I do it, it's perfectly okay. And it's not because I could argue from principles that there was any justification for that. In fact, my arguments were almost exactly what the leftists say about the welfare state. Well, the common good and the ends justify the means, and we need, and people will starve otherwise. For the military, for the conservatives, we'll be invaded and we'd all be speaking German if we're not robbing all of you to build this giant, pointless, warmongering monstrosity that commits atrocities around the world on a regular basis. So I can remember my brain jumping out of principle mode to justify the crap I believed in, because it was a blind faith religious belief in statism that you can't justify using any amount of logic or principles. It doesn't stinking work. And if you could achieve the impossible and justify that, here is why it's okay for you all, whoever I'm talking to be forced to fund whatever flavor of statism I want. Well, great. I also just gave the same argument you should use to justify forcing me to fund whatever you want, whether I want to or not. Because the same principles would apply. But conservatives don't recognize that. And the weird process of them being so succinct and thorough and principled and consistent when it comes to dissecting and bashing the authoritarian lunacy that they oppose, and then watching them just throw all that out the window when it comes to authoritarian lunacy that they advocate, and say, well, you're a criminal. That's against the law. Can't do that because it's against the law. And they say that. They do it all the time. That's illegal. You're a criminal. You should be put in prison. Instead of speaking in terms of principles, like, wait a minute. So you had a plant, and the politician said you're not supposed to have that plant. And as a result, you didn't hurt anybody. You didn't threaten anybody. Like, smoke a joint every couple days in your own house. And then they sent a bunch of armed psychos with machine guns to kick down your door at 2 a.m. and drag you off and stick you in a cage for 10 or 15 years. Explain to me how that's moral. It's the law. That's all they have. That's all they can have. Because without that excuse of law and authority, every single conservative would say, that's frickin' evil. You don't do that to other people. That's not how you treat other human beings. But just like every other flavor of statist, when it comes to the authoritarian crap that they want, their logic shuts down. Their principles shut down. And they just go, it's the law. You just obeyed the law. You deserved it. And so they do that so much with police abuse. We have to respect the cops. No, we don't. None of the cops deserve respect. Not a single one. Because it's the job of all of them to enforce the law, which is any arbitrary crap the politicians make up. Every once in a while, they might happen to stop some private aggressor, but they are government aggressors. It's their job. They're also paid with stolen money. They don't deserve respect from anyone who actually values freedom. And yet conservatives think they're for freedom and go, rah, 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 freedom, wave the American flag. Which in itself is pretty funny. I believe in freedom, which is why I am waving the emblem of the ruling class that claims the right to forcibly dominate me and extort me. And you think those two go together? Why exactly? Because they don't think, and neither did I when I was one of them. But it's so, to me, that's more weird than watching leftists be statists, because often leftists are just guided by emotions, and it's just like, oh, some kids got killed in a school, we have to do something, ban assault weapons. And so they don't even think in principles to begin with. They're emotionally driven as a general rule, and they just think, do something! And they're not even clear about what they're advocating be done. And then when if I'm being nice and going through Candles in the Dark and asking them, well, what do you advocate? Then they flounder around, because if they get to the specifics, they're not comfortable saying, well, I want, SWAT teams armed with machine guns kicking down everybody's door who might happen to have a gun. Because then even they would go, wait, that's a little hypocritical. So I'm for gun violence against 100 million people I don't know because I'm opposed to gun violence. That doesn't add up. But they don't usually think in principles anyway. They don't argue from principles. They argue from need and emotion and the collective common good BS rhetoric. So to me, it's extra weird to watch conservatives do the thing where they try to argue from principles and concepts and individual freedom and liberty and yada, yada, yada. But then you can watch their brain just turn off when it comes to the authoritarian crap that they advocate. You can watch Ben Shapiro do it. You can watch, I even saw, I think a couple times, I even saw Jordan Peterson do it, where suddenly the law means something. And the concept of the law, because that's just a different way to say authority. The commands of the thing that has the right to rule us. That's what the law is short for. Authority has dictated that thou shalt not have that plant. And if you had that plant after they said you shall not have that plant, then you are the bad guy. And if someone kicks down your door and points a machine gun in your face, well, it's your own darn fault for being a criminal. You shouldn't have disobeyed the law. Rah, rah, rah for freedom. Every conservative does that. And eventually, it's fun to watch it when conservatives like to philosophize and think about principles enough that they fall off the spectrum. I was a big fan of Joseph Sobran for many, many years, and watched him go through the process of going from a conservative to actually applying those principles consistently across the board, including to the authoritarian crap he used to believe in, and then falling off the spectrum and turning into an anarchist. And a zillion years ago, I used to subscribe to a little publication called the Conservative Chronicle. And it was funny to watch him still writing his article. It ran a bunch of places, I think, but it ran in the Conservative Chronicle. And he just slowly reasoned himself out of all his statism and became an anarchist. And then, like, what's the Conservative Chronicle going to do? It's like, wait a minute, you're not cheering for the authoritarian stupidity that we want anymore. Like, are we going to kick him out because he wants too much freedom? Like, yeah, you're supposed to rah about freedom, but only up to a point, and then you're supposed to throw your principles out the window and cheer for authoritarian stupidity. But you can literally watch people's brains shut off when they jump to, well, it's against the law, you should be arrested. And they say it just like that. I've seen Matt Walsh say exactly that. Their brain just shuts off. This is nothing about principle, nothing about, well, that law is unjust. Like, even though they all know a bunch of examples, either in the past or present, of laws that they would say, A, are illegitimate, and B, should be disobeyed. So it's so weird to watch when somebody, and this is, a lot of people have seen this and noticed this in a bunch of different people, where a lot of statists are very rational and they're very intelligent and they know a bunch of stuff and they can explain a bunch of stuff and they can have rational conversations about, this, that, and the other thing. And then at some point they reach that wall and then their brain turns off because the authoritarian indoctrination kicks in and there's suddenly this mindless zombie that goes, you have to obey the law. If you disobey the law, you're a criminal and should be punished. It's like, what do you... The law is just somebody scribbled some crap. That's not always good, right? There have been bad laws. Well, yeah, but this is here and now, and these are the laws you're supposed to obey because I said so, and I don't really want to think about it. Now you're the bad guy because you disobeyed them. It's so weird to watch. It's like watching some guy teaching, like, calculus, and then you say, what's 2 + 2? 5. Of course it's 5. Anybody who thinks it isn't 5 is evil and stupid and ridiculous. Duh, obviously. Okay, now back to calculus. It's like, why does your brain shut off when it comes to something that simple, like using the example of the war on drugs, of if somebody has a habit you don't approve of and he's doing it in his own house and not threatening or endangering anybody, it's not okay to send thugs with guns after him. Is that all that difficult to comprehend? And yet, how many conservatives, including me when I was one, it's pretty embarrassing now, aren't able to think about something that simple? They can talk about complex economic things of how blah, 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 but when it comes to the authoritarianism they still believe in, their brain just shuts off. Because it is a cult. It is programming. And it is a religious programming. Statism is always a religious programming, and it is designed to shut down logic so that even people who can otherwise be rational and eloquent and describe all these things, when it comes to the point at which their statism kicks in, their brain kicks off. And it's weird and frustrating to watch, and it would be really fun to get on their shows. I don't think I'm ever going to be invited to talk to any of them. But it would be hysterical and fun to do that because I would do the candles in the dark thing and break it down. Okay, it's illegal. This person's a criminal. But let's look at what are you actually advocating. Let's use an actual example of, okay, there's some hippie. He's never threatened anybody. He's never harmed anybody. He's not endangering anybody. He's smoking a joint in one of the states where so far it isn't legal yet. What do you want to have happen to him? Now, a lot of conservatives will either go, well, he broke the law. He has to be arrested. Okay, well then be more specific. So you want people to go to his house with guns and drag him away and put him in a cage for, 5-10 years? You want that guy to sit in a cage for a few years, also be threatened with, have his home invaded by armed people, because he was smoking a joint. You personally want that to happen to that guy personally. And you could say, well, it's the law. Well, that's just describing, okay, it's one thing to say, well, this is going to happen. This is the consequence of him taking that risk. Okay, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, the whole candles in the dark approach is, I'm asking what you personally advocate. And conservatives, when you try to make them do that, they go into the same floundering cognitive dissonance as every other brand of statist. Because you cannot believe in authoritarianism of any flavor without having internal contradictions. And to me, it's just funny that some of the most glaringly obvious contradictions come from conservatives who like to talk about principles and concepts and stuff until it gets to the statism they believe in. And then you can just watch their stinking brains shut off. And it's weird and it's frustrating. And it may be extra frustrating to me because I recognize myself in that. And I realize I used to be that. And I could eloquently explain why the left was unjustified in using government violence for all these things. And then I would just revert to, oh yeah, but the government violence I want, that's okay. It's the law. It's necessary. It's in the Constitution and stuff. Scribbles and stuff and rituals, so it's okay when I do it. Or when the types of authoritarian aggression I advocate are the good kind of violent aggression against my fellow man. So yeah, it would be fun to talk to some of those people, because I think a bunch of them mean well. I meant well when I was a conservative, when I was a duped statist of that particular flavor. But my brain would literally shut off, and it would be fun to sort of gently see if I could keep their brain turned on while we actually look at the part of their beliefs which advocates immoral, violent aggression against millions of people they don't know, which every single statist does that. If you believe in government, you absolutely advocate immoral, violent aggression against lots of people you don't know. It may be slightly different than the immoral, violent aggression that the other political party advocates, but everybody who believes in government, including me back when I was a statist, advocates immoral violence. And it would be really fun and interesting if I'd ever get the chance to sit down with some of these conservatives and see if I could get them to actually look beneath the knee-jerk brain shutting off trigger of the authoritarianism they believe in, and see if they could actually try to support it with principles, because of course they can't. And watching them try is fascinating. And that's why, to me, Candles in the Dark is very illuminating, not just for the person you're talking to, but studying how the human brain can hold different concepts that don't nearly stinking match, or how it can be so rational and well thought out and principled up to a point, and then reason and logic and principles are just out the stinking window. So anyway, I guess I've babbled enough about that, but yeah, if somebody knows how to get me on one of those shows, like that's ever going to happen, that would be hysterical, because I would be gentle. I wouldn't be quite this rude and judgmental about it. I would go into Candles in the Dark mode, and it would be fun to watch, get to the point where the brain shuts off and goes, it's against the law, you have to be prosecuted. And dig beneath that, like gently and in a friendly manner, and just to clarify, well, what is it that you advocate? And then watch their brain start to short circuit, because they absolutely hold conflicting ideas in their own head. It's not that their ideas conflict with mine, it's their ideas conflict with themselves. Also conflicts with mine, but more importantly, it conflicts with themselves. So yeah, that would be fun to finally, especially having come from their position, so I know their arguments very well. I made their arguments, and I had the same blind spot that they still have. So that would be fun and fascinating. Will it ever happen? Probably not, but I thought I'd do a rant about it anyway. So there.